Chapter 3. The consulting neurologist pinned up the X-rays again and searched for indentations that would look as if the skull had been pounded like copper with a tiny hammer. Dr. Klein stood behind him with folded arms. They had both looked for lesions and collections of fluid, for a possible shifting of the pineal gland. They were probing now for Luckenschädel skull, the telltale depressions that would indicate chronic intracranial pressure. They did not find it. The date was Thursday, April 28. The consulting neurologist removed his glasses and carefully tucked them into the left breast pocket of his jacket. "There's just nothing there, Sam. Nothing I can see." Klein frowned at the floor and shook his head. "Doesn't figure," he said. "Want to run another series?" "I don't think so. I think I'll try an LP." "Good idea. In the meantime, I'd like you to see her." "How's today?" "Well, telephone buzzer." "Excuse me." He picked up the telephone. "Yes. Mrs. MacNeil on the phone. Says it's urgent." "What line?" "She's on 3. He punched the extension button. "Dr. Klein here." Chris's voice was distraught and on the brim of hysteria. "Oh, Christ, Doc, it's Regan. Can you come right away?" "Well, what's wrong?" "I don't know, Doc, I just can't describe it. Please come over right away." "Come now." "I'm on the way." He disconnected and buzzed his receptionist. "Susan, tell Dresner to take my appointments." He hung up the phone and started taking off his jacket. "That's her, Dick," he said. "Want to come? It's only just across the bridge." "I've got an hour, I'd say." "Okay, let's go." They were there within minutes, and at the door, where a frightened-looking Sharon greeted them, they heard moans and screams of terror from Regan's bedroom. "I'm Sharon Spencer," she told them. "Come on in. She's upstairs." Sharon led them to the door of Regan's bedroom, then cracked it open slightly and called in, "Chris, doctors." Chris instantly came to the door, her face contorted in a vice of fear. "Oh, my God, come on in," she said in a quavering voice. "Come on in and take a look at what she's doing. This is Dr." In the middle of the introduction, Klein broke off as he caught sight of Regan. Shrieking hysterically and flailing her arms, her body seemed to fling itself up horizontally into the air above her bed and then be slammed down savagely onto the mattress. It was happening rapidly, again and again. "Oh, Mother, make him stop." Regan was screeching. "Stop him. He's trying to kill me. Stop him. Stop him. Mother." "Oh, my baby." Chris whimpered as she jerked up a fist to her mouth and bit it. She turned a beseeching look to Klein. "What's happening, Doc? What is it?" Klein shook his head, his gaze fixed on Regan as the phenomenon continued. She would lift about a foot each time and then fall with a wrenching of her breath, as if unseen hands had picked her up and thrown her down. Chris pressed both her hands to her mouth, staring wildly as the up and down movements abruptly ceased and Regan started twisting feverishly from side to side with her eyes rolled upward into their sockets so that only the whites were exposed. "Oh, he's burning me. Burning me," she was moaning as her legs began rapidly crossing and uncrossing. The doctors moved closer, one on either side of the bed, and still twisting and jerking, Regan arched her head back, disclosing a swollen, bulging throat as she muttered incomprehensibly in guttural tone, no on my." Klein reached down to check her pulse. "Now, let's see what the trouble is, dear," he said gently. And abruptly he was reeling across the room, staggering backward from the force of a vicious swing of Regan's arm as she suddenly sat up, her face contorted with a hideous rage. "The sow is mine," she bellowed in a coarse and powerful voice. "She is mine. Keep away from her. She is mine." A yelping laugh gushed up from her throat, and then she fell on her back as if someone had pushed her. She pulled up her nightgown, exposing her genitals. Fuck me, she screamed at the doctors, and with both her hands began masturbating frantically. Moments later Chris ran from the room with a stifled sob right after Regan put her fingers to her lips and licked them. Riveted, watching in shock, Klein approached the bedside again, this time warily, as Regan appeared to hug herself, her arms folded, her hands caressing them. "Ah, yes, my pearl," she crooned in that strangely coarsened voice and with both her eyes closed as if in ecstasy. "My child. My flower. My pearl." Then again she was twisting from side to side, moaning meaningless syllables over and over, until abruptly she sat up with her eyes staring wide in helpless terror. She mewed like a cat. Then barked. Then neighed. And then, bending at the waist, started whirling her torso around in rapid, strenuous circles. She gasped for breath. "Oh, stop him," she wept. "Please, stop him. It hurts. Make him stop. Make him stop. I can't breathe." Klein had seen enough. He fetched his medical bag to the window and quickly began to prepare an injection. The neurologist remained beside the bed and saw Regan fall backward as if from a shove while her eyes rolled upward into their sockets again, and with her body rolling from side to side, she began to mutter rapidly in guttural tones. The neurologist leaned closer and tried to make it out. Then he saw Klein beckoning and he straightened up and went to him quickly. "I'm giving her Librium," Klein told him guardedly, holding the syringe to the light of the window. "But you're going to have to hold her." The neurologist nodded, but seemed preoccupied, inclining his head to the side as if listening to the muttering from the bed. "What's she saying?" Klein whispered. "I don't know. Just gibberish. Nonsense syllables." Yet his own explanation seemed to leave him unsatisfied. "She says it as if it means something, though. It's got cadence." Klein nodded toward the bed and the men approached quietly from either side. As they came, the tormented child went rigid, as if in the stiffening grip of tetany, and the doctors, who had stopped at the bedside, turned and looked at each other significantly. Then they looked again to Regan as she started to arch her body upward into an impossible position, bending it backward like a bow until the brow of her head had touched her feet. She was screaming in pain. The doctors eyed one another with baffled and questioning surmise. And then Klein gave a signal to the neurologist, but before the consultant could seize her, Regan fell limp in a faint and wet the bed. Klein leaned over and rolled up her eyelid. Checked her pulse. "She'll be out for a while," he murmured. "I think she convulsed." "Don't you?" "Yes, I think so." "Well, let's take some insurance." He deftly administered the injection. "Well, what do you think?" Klein asked as he pressed a circle of sterile tape against the puncture. "Temporal lobe." "Sure. Maybe schizophrenia's a possibility, Sam, but the onset's much too sudden." "She hasn't any history of it, right?" "No, she hasn't." "Neurasthenia?" Klein shook his head. "Then hysteria, maybe." "I've thought of that," said Klein. "Of course. Though she'd have to be a freak to get her body twisted up like she did voluntarily, now wouldn't you say?" He shook his head. "No. I think it's pathological, Sam, her strength, the paranoia, the hallucinations. Schizophrenia, okay, those symptoms it covers. But temporal lobe would also cover the convulsions. There's one thing that bothers me, though." He trailed off with a puzzled frown. "What's that?" "Well, I'm really not sure, but I thought I heard signs of dissociation. My pearl, my child, my flower, the sow. I had the feeling she was talking about herself. Was that your impression too, or am I reading something into it?" As he mulled the question, Klein stroked his lower lip with a finger, then answered, "Well, frankly, at the time it never occurred to me, but then now that you point it out." He made a sound in his throat, looking thoughtful. "Could be," he said. "Yes. I guess it could." Then he shrugged off the notion. "Well, I'll do an LP right now while she's out and then maybe we'll know something. Sound right?" The neurologist nodded. Klein poked around in his medical bag, found a pill, and as he tucked it into a pocket, he asked the neurologist, "Can you stay?" The neurologist checked his watch. "Yeah, sure. Let's talk to the mother." They left the room and entered the hallway. Their heads lowered, Chris and Sharon were leaning against the balustrade by the staircase. As the doctors approached them, Chris wiped at her nose with a moist and balled-up handkerchief. Her eyes were red and small from crying. "She's sleeping," Klein told her, "and she's heavily sedated. She'll probably sleep right through until tomorrow." Gently nodding, Chris responded weakly, "That's good. Look, I'm sorry about being such a baby." "You're doing just fine," Klein assured her. "It's a frightening ordeal. By the way, this is Dr. Richard Coleman." Chris smiled at him bleakly. "Thanks for coming. Dr. Coleman's a neurologist." "Oh, yeah? And so what do you think?" she asked as she shifted her glance from one of the men to the other. "Well, we still think it's temporal lobe," Klein answered, "and Jesus, what in the hell are you talking about?" Chris suddenly erupted. "She's been acting like a psycho, like a split personality or something. I mean," and then, "Oh," she uttered softly and in pain as abruptly she pulled herself together and lowered her forehead into a hand. "Guess I'm all uptight," she said quietly as she lifted a haggard look to Klein. I'm so sorry, she said. You were saying? It was the neurologist who answered. Mrs. MacNeil, he said gently, there haven't been more than 100 authenticated cases of split personality in all of medical history. It's a very rare condition. Now I know the temptation is to leap to psychiatry, but any responsible psychiatrist would exhaust the somatic possibilities first. That's the safest procedure. Well, okay, then, so what's next? A lumbar tap, said Coleman. You mean a spinal? Chris asked him with a look of distress. He nodded. What we missed in the X-rays and the EEG could turn up there. At the least, it would exhaust certain other possibilities. I'd like to do it now, right here, while she's sleeping. I'll give her a local, of course, but it's movement I'm trying to eliminate. Listen, how could she jump off the bed like that? Chris asked, her eyes squinting in incomprehension. Well, I think we discussed that before, said Klein. Pathological states can induce abnormal strength and accelerated motor performance. But you said you don't know why? Well, it seems to have something to do with motivation, Coleman answered. But that's about all we know. Well, now, what about the spinal? Klein asked Chris. Can we go ahead with that? Abruptly sagging, Chris stared at the floor. Go ahead, she said softly. Do whatever you have to. Just make her well. May I use your phone? Asked Klein. Yeah, sure. Come on. There's one in the study. Oh, incidentally, said Klein as Chris turned around to lead them, she needs to have her bedding changed. Quickly moving away, Sharon briskly said, I'll do it right now. Can I make you some coffee? Asked Chris as the doctors followed her down the stairs. I gave the housekeeping couple the afternoon off, so it'll have to be instant. They declined. I see you haven't fixed that window yet, noted Klein. No, we called, though, Chris told him. They're coming out tomorrow with shutters you can lock. They entered the study, where Klein called his office and instructed an assistant to deliver the necessary equipment and medication to the house. And set up the lab for a spinal workup, he instructed. I'll run it myself right after the tap. When he'd finished the call, Klein asked Chris what had happened since last he saw Regan. Let's see now, last Tuesday, Chris pondered. No, on Tuesday there was nothing at all. She went straight up to bed and slept right through until late the next morning, and, oh, no, wait, she amended. No, she didn't. That's right. Willie mentioned that she'd heard her in the kitchen awfully early. I remember feeling glad that she'd gotten her appetite back. But she went back to bed then, I guess, because she stayed there the rest of the day. She was sleeping? Klein asked her. No, I think she was reading. Well, I started feeling a little better about it all. I mean, it looked as if the Librium was just what she needed. She seemed sort of far away, and that bothered me a little, but still it was a pretty big improvement. Then last night, again, nothing, Chris continued. Then this morning it started. Boy, did it start. She'd been sitting in the kitchen, Chris recounted, when Regan ran screaming down the stairs to her, cowering defensively behind her chair as she clutched Chris's arms and told her in a high-pitched, frightened voice that Captain Howdy was chasing her, had been pinching her, punching her, shoving her, mouthing obscenities, threatening to kill her. There he is, she had shrieked at last while pointing to the kitchen door. Then she'd fallen to the floor, her body jerking in spasms, as she gasped and wept and said that Howdy was kicking her. Then suddenly, Chris told the doctors, Regan had stood in the middle of the kitchen with her arms extended and had begun to spin rapidly around, like a top, continuing the movements for almost a minute until she had fallen to the floor in exhaustion. And then all of a sudden, Chris finished distressfully, I saw there was this hate in her eyes, this hate, and she told me. She called me a, oh, Jesus. Chris burst into convulsive sobbing. Klein moved to the bar, poured a glass of water from the tap and walked back toward Chris. The sobbing had ceased. Oh, shit, where's a cigarette? She sighed tremulously, wiping at her eyes with the knuckle of a finger. Klein gave her the water and a small green pill. Try this instead, he advised. That a tranquilizer? Yes. I'll have a double. One's enough. Chris looked away and smiled wanly. Big spender. She swallowed the pill and then handed the empty glass to the doctor. Thanks, she said softly, and then rested her brow on quivering fingertips and gently shook her head. Yeah, that's when it started, she picked up moodily. All of that other stuff. It was like she was someone else. Like Captain Howdy, perhaps, asked Coleman. Chris looked up at him in puzzlement. He was staring so intently. "What do you mean?" she asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Just a question." She turned absent eyes to the fireplace. "I don't know," she said dully. "Just somebody. Somebody else." There was a moment of silence. Then Coleman stood up. He had another appointment, he told them, and, after some vaguely reassuring statements, said goodbye. Klein walked him to the door. "You'll check the sugar?" Coleman asked him. "No. I'm the Roslyn Village idiot." Coleman smiled thinly. "I'm a little uptight about this myself," he said. He looked away pensively, stroking his lips and his chin with thumb and fingers. "A strange case," he brooded quietly. "Very strange." He turned to Klein. "Let me know what you find out." "You'll be home?" "Yes, I will. Give a call, okay?" "Okay." Coleman waved and left.